Well, welcome. This is a brief history of distance, online, and virtual education. So the first thing I wanted to do was just tell you a little bit about myself. You can read my biography in the wallboard and in the presenter's slideshow, which is on the Google Docs. I'm a part-time professor of psychology at North Central University, where I mostly teach statistics, undergraduate and graduate sort of applied statistics course, and history of psychology, which is one of my favorite areas in the world. And I'm also an independent online teacher. I do quite a lot of teaching, and you'll hear more about that when I do the lecture on developing an enthusiast's library. And welcome, everybody. The only reason why I know how to teach online is because Nellie gave me my start about 8 years ago. I was searching for free online teachers who could teach me how to teach online, because I've been applying for online teaching jobs and getting told, but you've never taught online before, which is a good thing to tell me. And I settled on Nellie and Nellie's network. And if any of you have not had the luck to take Moodle courses from Nellie, or otherwise live for a day or two on her amazing YouTube channel, there's a lot that Nellie can teach folks about, not only on the methodology of teaching, but the tone of teaching and how to use different types of technology and all kinds of other things. So I'm very grateful to her, and it started me out on a path that brought me to Second Life, and I'm very grateful to be here, and more recently to DigiWorlds as well. So like the course, I'm getting a little metaversey in my old age. So that's who I am, and if you want to read more information about my research and stuff, which I haven't done in quite some time, it's in the bio card. So before we get started, I wanted to mention that there are other resources for the talk in the wallboard. So if you haven't clicked on the wallboard to pick up the resources, I would say go ahead and do that, because it's got a lot of really good extras. For instance, I have a note card that includes links to YouTube videos from past SLMOOCs and from the Virtual World's Best Practices in Education 2017 conference. These are all available on YouTube, as I said, and they're specifically picked out because of their relevance to this particular lecture. Not only the past of education in virtual worlds, but also the future of education using virtual enhancements and augmented reality and headsets and all kinds of other stuff. So I recommend that YouTube list highly. Also, I have included a note card with links to several key books on virtual worlds education with their Amazon.com listings. I've taken these out of the Chilbo Public Library, and it's to give you an idea of some of the best books out there. One of which is by Celia Pierce and Tom Bolstaff, I think it is. And Celia Pierce is also on the YouTube link because she gave a keynote address at the VWBPE conference this year. And is just very, very interesting. There's a lot of really amazing work out there that has been written about using Second Life and about using virtual worlds in general. Many of the speakers that we're having in our course today participated in one of the most recent books, in fact, and you'll find that in the library, and the listing will be on this note card I'm mentioning. I also have a note card that links to the slideshare.net versions of this talk. Actually, I haven't put this talk up there yet, but I will. But also to the three other talks that I've done before on education in virtual world, or the history of virtual worlds, and so on. Those of you who have heard me talk before will recognize some of the slides in this presentation. But this time I also wanted to go back a little farther and talk about distance education in general. So there is quite a lot of new content here, as well as bibliography at the end and links to all of the images that are not cited directly on each of the slides. So that's the extra stuff that's available in the wallboard and on the slideshow. In the slideshow, will be downloadable from slideshare.net and also across the road in the exhibit area probably later on this week. So today's talk, we're going to talk about distance education from postcards to the internet. I love the fact that there was distance education with postcards, but anyway, we'll get there. Art and technology that set the scene for virtual worlds and education, learning and teaching in immersive space, and some commonalities between all modes of distance learning. So let's take a look at distance education from postcards to the internet. So I've been reading a lot of articles in the last few days about distance education in general and virtual world education in particular. And in one of the articles written by Casey and published in 2008, so right as virtual worlds were beginning to explode on the scene, he cited a gentleman from 1988 named Keegan who made a list of the elements of all distance education, whether we're talking about 18th century distance education or 20th or 21st century distance education. And these three elements are quasi-permanent separation between teacher and student throughout the length of the learning process. So this is the distance that teachers always try to bridge, the gap between themselves and their students when they use distance learning. And sometimes it's done very well and sometimes it's not done so well. The second one is the influence of an educational organization, both in the planning and preparation, the influence of an educational organization, both in the planning and the preparation of learning materials and in the provision of student support services. Now, obviously, if you're teaching a correspondence course for a group of knitters that happen to be in a social network that you have and you're writing letters and comments and so on, there still are other things that you need to do, even something so simple as a correspondence roundtable way of teaching. You need to keep track of who those students are. You need to make sure you prepare your learning materials in a way that will be coherent for them and useful for them. And you need to make sure that everybody's getting what they need and that you're assessing their progress through whatever type of course it might be. So no matter what type of distance education we're talking about, there is this educational organizational logistics job that has to be taken care of, no matter what type of distance education you're teaching. The third thing is the use of some form of technical media, such as print, audio, video, or computer, that will unite the teacher and the learner so that they can carry out the content of the course and bridge that gap between them in terms of their physical distance or in terms of that distance between the divide between the student and the teacher. So you have to have an understanding of what kind of technology you're using and how you can use it to bring yourself into that learning space together with your student and make it congenial for the student. Now here's some history. I didn't know until recently that people who write histories of distance education usually start in 1728. Now nobody's got papers from this gentleman, but there was an advertisement in the Boston Gazette in 1728 in which a person named Caleb Phillips advertised a shorthand course via postcard. So you sent him a postcard, like this wonderful, there's a 18th century postcard up at the top. I just cut out the picture of the two people that were on it, but it actually extended out in a rectangle so that you could write a little note. So you would write to Caleb Phillips and ask to take his shorthand course, and he would send you a lesson on a postcard, and then you would send him your response back again. So this is usually the point that's marked as the first moment in which distance education that we know of occurred. Now, of course, in scientific societies and just correspondence between people who had different sets of skills, there were always these kinds of communication distance communication abilities available if you were literate, if you could read and you could write. But this one is the first known example of a commercial distance course, which was basically, yeah, I would imagine clay tablets were probably too bulky, so you'd have to rely on your oral history ability, your memory ability, and in old times where the writing medium was not so easy. In Egypt, you had papyruses, at least. You could just unscroll them, and in Rome and Greece and so on. Anyhow, in the modern world, Caleb Phillips is the guy that gets the credit for starting a commercial distance learning course. Now, in the 1840s in the UK, and then in the 1850s in the US, Pitman's shorthand courses began to be marketed via postal correspondence. And in this case, you would get a little booklet. This one, I think, is from the later in the 19th century, not quite as early as the first course. You'd get a little booklet in the mail from Pitman, and you would have lessons in this booklet that you would have to complete, and then you sent them back via the post to Pitman. So if you were in the north of Scotland and you were interested in shorthand, and Pitman was not in the north of Scotland, it might take quite a while to get your grading back or your feedback back from your instructor. But still, it was happening through the postal system. In 1858, Oxford University began to offer degrees at a distance, again through correspondence. This is a incredibly enlightened idea for that era. Then in 1873, now this is a more of an avocational learning network. A society was founded in the U.S. by a woman named Anna Ticknor, and it was called the Society to Encourage Studies at Home. Now, it was founded in 1873, and by 1893, 20 years later, more than 10,000 people had joined and were taking mainly secretarial courses. These were mainly women who joined this society, and they were able to take these courses again through correspondence. In 1883, a correspondence university was established in Ithaca, New York, and a few years prior to that, William Rainey Harper, who's actually the person after whom one of the community colleges in Chicago is named, he was a member of the Board of Regents, and he managed to get the folks in New York State to recognize that correspondence courses could contain content that might be worthy of college credit. And once they had decided that was possible, then they okayed this correspondence university, which taught a variety of courses through the mail again. In 1892, the University of Chicago began offering a distance-only degree. Now, this was pretty unusual globally, but the University of Chicago, you have to remember, in those days had just been founded. It was a very new place and had a very modern sense of self, and so they began to offer a degree, a distance-only degree program, again through the mail. The first appearance of the word distance learning was in a pamphlet published by the University of Madison in that same year, in 1892. And in 1906, University of Wisconsin, the system, there's a bunch of campuses in the University of Wisconsin system, started to think about using a phonograph and recording phonograph records and sending them out to students. These were single lectures and not courses. And in the right-hand side of the slide, I couldn't find a very nice picture of a phonograph from 1906, but this is the 1908 Brunswick floor model of a phonograph. And on the top, you have a little turntable with a handle, and then at the bottom is a very ornate case. Prior to turntables being presented in this way, you would often find earlier in the 19th century music boxes that were meant to play large discs that had orchestral or other kinds of complex music punched into the disc. So these were kind of transitional machines in which the same type of cases for the music boxes were then converted over to have a turntable at the top. And then at the very top of that small illustration that you see is the Silvertone 1921 radio, and that was available from the Sears mail order catalog in the United States. So Wisconsin thought, well, this is great. We can record our lectures on phonograph records, and then we can send them out to the students, and they can play the lectures at home. And if there was an assessment involved, it would be the same kind of thing. So a combination of correspondence and the phonograph record. In 1918, the University of Cape Good Hope in South Africa changed its name to the University of South Africa and became the first university dedicated to distance learning. I read that they are still doing mainly distance learning. I'm not sure about that. In the U.S. in 1921 as well, the first distance learning radio licenses were issued to the University of Salt Lake, the University of Wisconsin, and the University of Minnesota. 197 more radio licenses for the purpose of education were issued in the U.S. between 1921 and 1946. And I must apologize for the Anglo-American centricity of this talk. I didn't find any references that talked too much about what was going on in Europe or elsewhere in the world. This is a little Anglo-American centric. I'm sorry. Now, radio, whenever I hear about radio courses, I always think of the pictures that you see from movies that are set in the 1920s and the 30s, or that wonderful scene from Downton Abbey where the entire staff and the family come together in the Great Hall to listen to the Queen's Christmas speech via the radio, and everyone is kind of shocked by the sound rattling around that old building. It's a wonderful way, though, to really listen in, and we do it today. So many of us are podcasters. I've read a number of articles over the last couple of years in which the authors, blogs, and so on have commented on how surprising it is that as a culture, now that we have virtual worlds and computers and all kinds of personal devices that can show us film and show us other kinds of materials, that we're plugging in and listening to audiobooks and making podcasts our appointment television, and not podcasts with a video attached, but just podcasts. But radio allows you to use your own imagination and your own abilities to fill in the gaps. And I think that's a very powerful incentive. So now we're getting to 1950 and distance education and television. I have to say, I was surprised to see that the University of Wisconsin was in such of the forefront. I lived 11 miles south of Wisconsin as a young girl, and then moved to Chicago. And I was very proud to see that City Colleges of Chicago was also featuring on this list, because I worked as a secretary there in my 20s in early 30s, and was very blown away by their creativity in providing education to military who were deployed and to people who were housebound and so on. So anyhow, in 1950, the University of Iowa started offering college courses by television. There is a reference that talks about college courses on being televised by the University of Iowa much earlier, around the very beginning of television. But I think they must have been closed circuit television, because they were 1939 to 1941 in that era, before commercial television really debuted. Not that it was in every home until the 50s, but in 1951, City Colleges of Chicago set up a comprehensive televised education program in which students could take courses but also earn degrees. In 1953, the University of Houston was awarded the first national educational license for televised courses in the U.S. And in 1969, Open University, where courses and degrees were offered only by radio and TV, was founded in the UK, and that was followed very closely by Athabasca University, which is Canada's Open University, in 1970, and Feenan Universität, Germany's Open University. So there was an explosion over the mid-century of the 20th century of looking for and utilizing new technologies that were available to provide educational courses and degrees to people who could not be in the area. This is a topic that I found to be very interesting. Ah, lovely. Yeah, this now we're talking about satellite networks and teleconferencing and video conferencing, which Xenia is mentioning. When I was a little girl, I think it must have been in the mid-60s, like 63, 64, we went to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago to see the video phone, which everybody thought was going to be in our homes within a week and a half. And we got to stand in a kiosk and speak to someone in a science museum in another country in the U.S. And it looked a little bit like this illustration. You just kind of saw this little kind of square, and you saw this fuzzy grain film of the person at the other end, and you got to say a couple of things, and then the next kid in line would get to come in and give it a try. Well, it really wasn't until the 1980s that the use of video conferencing and satellite networks became inexpensive enough to be used by corporations. So mainly corporations were using this. And they were using it mainly for the same reason that some big corporations got into Second Life back in the day, which was that they could provide training for their employees in a way that was much less expensive. So instead of having to pay for the entire group that needed training to come to some city in the U.S., they were, or whatever country it was, they were able to do the core of the training through video conferencing. In 1982, the National University Teleconferencing Network began transmitting to its 40 members. They were based in Colorado, I think. And in 1985, the National Technical University in Colorado started offering courses, and that's supposed to say courses and degrees, through a combination of teleconferencing and correspondence between the student and the teacher. So you would see your course on the television, and then you would turn in your assignments through the post. Now, you can see this national network of teleconferencing is part of the thing that laid this hunger for having some other kind of network, for getting us all connected in a way that would allow us to teach and learn together. Of course, you remember Tim Berners-Lee, who just casually, well, maybe not so casually, but proposed a file sharing system between university computers on a net that was then private to universities in the United States, and they worked that out, and the next thing we knew, a few years later, the internet opened to the public and the World Wide Web was born, and it's grown exponentially since then. This photograph is of a BBS server farm, and when I was first using my computer in 1991, I was on a dial-up, several dial-up bulletin board servers. I don't know how many of you remember BBSs. The BBS, and in the old days you had to pay $3 an hour in the US with a dial-up connection that was very slow and didn't bring so much information down to you to get into the BBS. And oh, wonderful, Exosius, that's marvelous. Allowed you to get in touch with people and allowed you to take a look at things. I had a desktop computer that I thought was massively powerful because I had worked on computers in some of my jobs in the late 1970s, and they were infinitely less powerful. But it had only a 20 megabyte hard card, and I remember the day that I filled that completely up, just downloading little images for something I was working on. So that's what that is. It's a picture of a BBS server farm. So in 1993, Jones International University opened providing degrees through a combination of technologies and the internet. In this era, there very early on, University of Phoenix also opened and started providing education through a combination of correspondence and other methods. In 95, Penn State University, Gerald Maddox was the very first person in the U.S. who actually offered a course on art that had no other possibility. There was nothing going back and forth in the mail. You weren't giving your professor a call. Supposedly, everything was on the internet. And then in 1997, these are sort of selected things. California formed the California Virtual Campus, which aggregated 1,500 courses from 100 universities that would offer higher education certificates and degree programs, and quite a lot of on-campus students in California were taking advantage of this. So Sheila is saying, Rhiannon says she remembers dialing into her uni and telenetting around the web. It was amazing. My goodness. It was that ugly dead screen, green or amber, depending on what you had, and or black or amber, depending on what you had, and you just typed, and there was no graphics and no nothing. And Sheila's saying from 1980, I was marketing and training people to use an online bibliographic service. We had to use a dial-up network, and the computers were the size of washing machines. Yep. I had a friend who worked at Linux, and not Linux. I'm trying to think of it as one of the bibliographic services, LexisNexis, in that era. Yeah, that's it. When you're reading this history, Xenia is saying it sounds like Coursera. You realize that a lot of what's been going on today and what people are thinking of doing in the future are built on this very deep kind of history that we don't usually think about. That's it. Everything was so slow. Just astonishing. So I'm going to let you read through these statistics for a second because I have a cough and I'm going to drink something. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple seconds. Welcome everybody who's just joined us. Well, as you can see from this slide, the numbers of people, even in the 19th century, who were looking for a way to do distance education just were kind of huge. And they have kept growing and growing and growing over time. Now, this last statistic in 2016 is from one of the articles that I think it's from the online learning. I think that's the Babson survey at the bottom, that link there. All these links are live on slideshare.net. 1 in 4 college students, it's estimated in the United States, or more than 5.8 million students, are taking advantage of online and distance learning, even while they're on campus, even if they're not distance students to that campus, but are only on the campus itself. Okie dokies. I would bet, I think you're right, Exosia said it's 1 in 4 now, and we're going to get to parity and majority in not too long, I think. So let's take a look at arts and technology, and those of you who were at one of my previous talks will recognize some of these slides. I took a few of them out of a previous presentation just to show you another kind of walk through history on how we got to the actual idea of virtual worlds. So a number of things have been touted as being very important to the idea of a virtual world, and one of the great resources for this is Dippity.com, the Web History Project. There's a lot of material that's available there. Some of what I'm showing you I think is not available anymore. Some of the entries in that timeline come and go, but it's a great resource for just taking a look at how all these different ideas came together to produce a virtual world. And this particular one is a 18th century patented painting technique for producing a total representation of nature, and it's called the panorama technique, and the idea was to allow the person who's paying attention closely to this picture, to this painting, to begin to get a feel of immersion, of visual immersion in almost a 3D way to the scene that's being painted. In the 19th century, stereopticons were all the rage, and this idea was to give you take 2 photographs of a site and present them to your eyes, one to the left eye, one to the right eye, so that your own visual process could knit them back into a single 3D image. This is again this notion that the best way, exactly, an early Google Cardboard, exactly. You can think of this as the best way to see 3D, that if you can't be in nature, at least you can see nature on a photograph, even a sepia photograph, in 3D. There's also foreshadowings going on in lots of different books. I only pulled 2 out of the list from that previous PowerPoint that's available in the extras in the wellboard. The first is from 1909 called The Machine Stops, and the second one is from 1959, Time Out of Joint. And both of these books tried to put forward a life that was embodied in a completely constructed world, socially complex, but very separate from the real. So the notions of the metaverse, the notions of virtual worlds, even in one of my previous lectures with that other slide deck, I said that the Forster book, I mean, if the guy from Matrix, who wrote the Matrix movies, didn't get inspired by this book, he certainly could have gotten inspired. So these ideas were bubbling up among the most creative among us much earlier on than when they were brought to fruition in the way that we have done it. Now, more directly relevant, in 1956, Martin Heilig tried to come up with a way to watch a movie, and he called it the full body experience. And the idea was you sat on a little stool. He actually envisioned movie theaters in which everybody paid for their ticket and came into an auditorium and sat themselves down in one of these machines, and they'd be rocked around, and they'd hear wind going by, and they'd see the thing that they were watching, and they'd be touching the machine, and so on. It didn't go over. I think the remodeling of cinemas around the world probably was the barrier to that adoption, but it was a great idea. And then in 1965, we have Ian Sutherland, who came up with the heads-up display, or HUD. And he was one of the first people that thought of this. If you see the whole picture, which I think I have a larger size of this picture, that headset on his head is actually so heavy, another piece of machinery is holding it up so that he can see through it. And now we've got, as I think it was Lear said, Google Cardboard and so on. Oh, ViewMaster. I don't think I even have that in that other, but yes. ViewMaster was that little handheld device that had all the pictures in it, and you would click through and see the pictures of other locations around the world. That was marvelous. So, and then I didn't pull out all of the computer games and all that kind of stuff that led towards the idea that we needed to have something graphic to look at. We needed to be able to see something and see these other worlds represented to us visually. And so I just picked out these three. One was Lucasfilm and Quantum Link Habitat, which came out in 1986, and I'm sure was thought to be absolutely amazing at the time. I remember doing computer games on those huge things that looked like butcher's paper on a printer, where it would say to you, you're in a cavern, look left, what do you see? And you had to, or you see a sword, and you had to type in, pick up the sword, and so on, and then it would chunk up with the next typed instruction or description. So to see this on the screen must have been really astonishing. In 1995, WorldChat was developed, which was similar actually to the Cyber Lounge that we experienced in Selby. Oh, wonderful, Exocius. In Selby's, yes, exactly, Rhiannon. In Selby's presentation the other day, in which we will hear more about from Dieter, from Ed Tarber in his presentation tomorrow. And then Alpha Worlds, which is actually is now called Active Worlds. It started out as Alpha Worlds in 95 and became Active Worlds in 97. So we're on our way towards virtual worlds. Now, this I found really interesting the first time I was out there on this Dippity.com Web History Project page looking for the history of virtual worlds, that in 1998, which is well before Linden Labs debuted Second Life, University of California, Santa Cruz students got together with a number of programmers and educators, and they put together a virtual world for the students of University of California, Santa Cruz. And the collaborators who helped them build this virtual world were an international group of people with this kind of expertise. And then students could come in, and there was a welcome center. There were note cards, as you can see, and you could make avatars and so on. So we're getting really close to the virtual worlds that we're using today. And then, of course, along came Linden World, and everybody knows that story, that they were trying to figure out a way to show a customer how to use a particular product. And they built a little virtual world to do that, and then discovered that the customers, employees, and employees of Linden itself were playing in that little constructed world. And they got the message that people really enjoyed this and found it to be immersive and exciting and so on. And there's a number of links to YouTube videos about these early worlds. And that little map was the original map of Second Life, which is dwarfed to many, many orders of magnitude by today's map. So let's move on a little bit and focus more on virtual worlds and education. And this is just somebody who's doing what I love to do, sit outside with your laptop, and a picture from Callie Pizarro's talk yesterday. So let's talk about education in virtual worlds and give the context. Most of these pictures are from, actually the top one is from our opening session. The next one down is from the closing dance in 2016. The one below that is from 2015. These are from all the past SLMOOC courses. And then the one at the bottom was the group photo at the end of a course that took place in the SLMOOC 2014. So education takes, as Rhiannon was saying before, in virtual worlds, virtual environments, multi-user virtual environments, massive multiplayer online games, and so on. So virtually anywhere that you can get together, talk to each other, form an alliance, create something, complete something, that can be used, whether it's World of Warcraft or Minecraft or Lord of the Rings Online or whatever. The education level and types, as we all have seen over the years, have proliferated from primary education through high school, university education, lifelong adult education, professional development, and general education. And the types of learning are problem-based, inquiry-based, game-based. They can be role-playing, virtual quests, collaborative learning, design courses, traditional learning with discussion groups, lectures, and conferences like this, language learning, especially very well done in virtual worlds, I think, and virtual field laboratories, field work, and exploration. And one of the main concepts, of course, for educators is that active learning can take place while you and I are sitting here and I'm yammering on and everybody's listening to me, so that's very traditional and kind of passive learning. There are ways to build in active learning to any kind of educational pursuit, whatever level it may be pitched for. Installations can also be made that house, include, provide space for these active learning quests or building tasks or whatever they might be. Creation is possible. Curation is possible. That allows us to have some of the most beautiful art galleries and museums and learning centers and libraries and so on around all of the virtual worlds that are out there now. It gives us a space of immersion where we can collaborate with each other, where we have social engagement, and allow us to engage in connecting and getting to know people from all kinds of different cultures and religions and countries. If not, being able to get along and understand and trust the expertise and the understanding of even a dragon with a fire on his head giving a talk at an education conference. So I think it expands our view of who we are, who we might be, and what we have in common. And that's certainly a connectivist idea. As many of you know, the educational advantages in virtual worlds is that you've got this real-time experience by the immersive nature of the environment and the opportunities, as I said, for real-world collaboration through text and voice and shared real-time experiences. That top picture is Corellia Condor teaching a language class from the 2014 MOOC, and we're hoping to have her back again this year. And the bottom one is Ellie Brewster, who was giving us a building workshop in, I think, 2015. So we can build, we can script, and building and scripting skills can be at you can do a lot with very basic levels of building and scripting skills. And that allows teachers to provide an active, immersive environment as well as to give students the ability to firsthand experience creation and scripting. Students can engage in practical mathematical, visual arts, graphics, writing, speaking, and so on. My favorite example of this is from Reaction Grid, and I have forgotten now, I think it was Haley Swansong, who I haven't seen in many years, who was a middle school teacher of computer arts. And her school in Michigan had a island in reaction grid called My Michigan. And their classroom job, the task for that semester for the classroom, were to have the first graders develop little cards, little text cards that would identify the buildings and the various activities on My Michigan. And the folks who were a little bit higher up in grade level, I think it might have been a lower, like first to fifth grade or sixth grade, their job was to build these buildings with doors that worked and teleporters that took you to the right floor and so on. And they had a terrible snowstorm, which Michigan has periodically. And she came in at home onto her computer to just kind of do some things around the My Michigan Island and see what was on and what was going on, expecting not to see a single student from the school, because the students in the school would be in the computer lab working together on their various tasks for the My Michigan Island and reaction grid. And instead, a large percentage of her students from all the various grades were using their snow day to sit down at their home computer and continue to build and to make note cards and to wander around the My Michigan island. So there's also this cutting down of the distance, cutting the gap between what's considered to be learning as work and what's considered to be learning as life and learning as some just wonderful pursuit. So that's also very important for a very important result, I think, of co-immersion in a virtual world. So the social distance is both close and far in virtual worlds. You're close enough for social bonds to form, but you're far enough to retreat when you're threatened. You can manage social encounters to fit interactional and collaborative skills. Although if you have a persistent person you really don't want to talk to following you around, that can be kind of difficult. First-hand experiences are very translatable to the real world, and there's a lot of research out there that you can find in the bibliography and in some of the extra resources and the books that I mentioned in the note cards. Exactly. I think, Laura, you're right. That first-hand experience is translatable to the real world, and skills that are learned here, both social and task-oriented learning skills, can be translated to the real world as well. Yes, I love that idea. Let the electrons do the walking. The disadvantages, as all of you guys know, and these are my slides from some years back, basically things that we did on ISTE in the old ISTE social committee and one of our events, is managing time zones and language barriers. I almost never see someone from Australia unless I'm up really late or up really early. And then even if you have an international universal translator box around, sometimes these translations can be almost as bad as Google Translate. So there are language barriers and time barriers, of course. Technological requirements are very difficult, and that does separate us. That does create a distance between those of us who can afford or have access to the type of technology that will play a virtual world and those of us who don't. And that could be everything from processor speeds, graphics, and so on. From 2009 until 2016, I worked on a regular old laptop, and I burnt out 3 of them, being in Second Life so much. Now I've got a gaming machine with a good power supply, and so far I'm pretty okay. But you know, that's a saving up the cash kind of a situation. Assumptions about virtual world etiquette, behavior, and personal responsibility. You need to learn what those are, and then different communities inside the virtual world have different ideas of what a proper etiquette might be in a certain situation. There are always social and interpersonal pressures to chat and play when you're supposed to be working on something, and sometimes it's very much worth just letting whatever you're working on go. There's a mismatch between learning styles and virtual attributes for some folks. Some folks come from the gaming world and they're used to having a very specific task with very specific set of hints and a very specific rules for achieving that goal. Some of us, like Marley, I played strategy games, but I didn't play World of Warcraft, or I didn't play any of those other kinds of games that were a little bit more structured. And I'm perfectly happy to have absolutely no rules in terms of what I can do and when I can do it and how I can build and create on my own. At the same time, that I'm glad that we have a division between the adult grid and our grid now and all those kinds of things. So many people come in with certain levels of expectations and they're not met, and they're better met for that individual person by a different type of technology or a different type of game. We can experience discomfort to the point of avoidance, and a lot of teachers have complained about how difficult it is to onboard all of their class members. Not everybody is going to think this is a great idea. And then there is comfort to the point of addiction. And my impulse to build my library and to work in Second Life had to do with the fact that I have been known in the past to play strategy computer games for 24 hours at a stretch. Luckily, not in the last 25 years, but certainly when they first came out. So I knew I had that ability to get so absorbed that the day would just roll by. And I wanted to limit myself to things that I thought were productive, and then reward myself with going to hear live music and going somewhere with my pals to dance or so on. So there's also that idea that if you're the kind of person that can just become totally immersed, and that's not adaptive for you psychologically, then you need to put some limits on that experience. So we're getting close to the end here. I think this might almost be the last one. Now we have all these metaverse options, and that's a marvelous thing. I think Hypergrid Business and Daniel Voyager's blog, and certainly the In-World Review with Malvern Evans on YouTube, and everything that Selby does with his blogs will give you an idea of how wide the metaverse is and how many kinds of things people are working on. That second picture there, the first one is just a Wordle, which has a number of worlds like Kitely and DigiWorld and OS Grid and so on. The second one is a picture from the Great Canadian Grid, which is Malvern Evans's home grid now, and where he often, I think he almost always now broadcasts In-World Reviewed from there. And then at the bottom, that's me in the plaza at the Escape Playground on DigiWorlds, where Eugenio Calderon and El Profesor, who's known here as, I think, Callisto Ensenal, teach Spanish. So there's now a huge variety of virtual worlds. They have variations in size and purpose, variations in cost for teachers and students. For instance, you can own a region in DigiWorlds for $20 a month as opposed to $200 or $300 or whatever it might be in Second Life now. You have variations in content and the availability of materials for building, though. If you're not on the Kitely market, it's kind of hard to get things. There might not be a whole lot available in world. And you might have a different kind of environment or a different owner of the grid who allows you to build certain things but not others. So folks who are used to saving their installations as OAR files may have difficulty getting those, getting permission to get those out onto a region in another virtual world. So there's lots of different kinds of pluses and minuses to all these other digital worlds. And some don't have voice, some have voice that's not so good, some have terrific voice, but the search engine isn't functional. So there's for me, it's great to have a base in Second Life, and my future plan is to decamp in 5 or 6 years or something like that when I'm really retired over to DigiWorlds, where it's not only more affordable, but by that time we'll have built up to the point that it's similar. And still play here. Not-for-profit schools, for-profit schools. Oh, Exosius is asking that. Yeah, actually, I work for a for-profit school that's very academically run, and some of us have talked a little bit about being in providing more opportunities for our students to get together using virtual worlds. And it's interesting, then the cost thing really comes in. If you're a for-profit school, nobody's going to give you a break for sure on the price, and the prices vary. And then there's variations in the ability to create content elsewhere and port it into virtual worlds. Luckily for me, to get things that I've built from here to DigiWorlds is not so difficult. So there's all those kinds of things that you have to think about, but being metaversey is really a good idea, I think. It really gives you an idea of how much creativity is out there and how it is possible to take what you're trying to do pedagogically or andragogically and find the world that fits what you want, that fits what you need. So let's talk briefly about commonalities, and here I am really at the end of this. Actually, love that DigiWorlds is kind of a hybrid of the two of those things. I love Metaverse actually too. I think Malvern may have coined it. I'm not sure. In DigiWorlds, I can upload images without having to pay any DigiWorld dollars, but I can also go out to the Kitely market and buy things that I can then have delivered to DigiWorlds. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, actually. So let's talk a little bit. If we talk about distance education students going all the way back to the postcard shorthand course in 1728 to all of our students yesterday and today, some of the people who are taking advantage of distance education, whether it's correspondence based or still on TV, still on radio, podcasts, or whatever else it might be, all the way up to virtual worlds and virtual environments. We have homeschooled kids who are involved that are taking courses out, or their parents are giving them other kinds of experiences that maybe they can't get because of the area that they live in. We have working adults who find distance education to work very well for them because it tends to be flexible, asynchronous, not time-locked, and so on. Individuals who are seeking professional development or training that's just not available in their cities or their towns, or in an area where the only other option are webinars from your professional organization or continuing education courses that might actually be quite expensive no matter whether they're in a webinar system or in a virtual world. Individuals who live in rural or remote locations and find it impossible or extremely difficult to get to an on-site educational location. Individuals with disabilities or other life-challenging situations that preclude their travel to an on-site location. Marley is saying the needs of educators who already have students and are connected to an institution are different from people like her who are adult educators and find their students here. And that's absolutely true. It depends on in what context you're teaching the most. So for instance, I never meet my psychology students in virtual worlds, but I certainly meet the students in the courses that I teach online outside of the SLMOOC here in Second Life, because it's easier and there's a group that comes together and we have the library and so on. Rhiannon is saying some of the hope over time with Open Simulator and some of the why for organizing the Open Simulator Community Conference is to bring users together. That's one thing that I really, really, really like about not-for-profit virtual worlds is this sense of commitment to open education and to collaboration and so on. And that's a fantastic conference. There are quite a lot of last year's OSCC lectures and talks and so on available on YouTube. Malvern Evans from In-World Review is also involved in live streaming some of that, as are some others. So I recommend not only watching the Virtual World Best Practices in Education YouTube videos if you can get them, but also the OSCC conference ones as well. That would be great, Rhiannon. And then finally, of course, the needs are flexibility and choice. Being able to find something that suits your situation, makes it possible for you to do it, and is something that fits the purpose of the course itself. So Sheila is saying, I'm at Sheffield University and we've had an on-campus librarianship master's program for a long time. It's still running on campus, but our new distance learning master's program immediately had more students because people are less willing and less able to give up their jobs and move. Just mentioning that, I think that's true. It's more important, you know, we all of us have life-based commitments that are, or challenges that give us that need to look for flexibility and choice. And virtual worlds provide it. So the challenges for course designers is taking advantages of the affordances of the technology. So back in the day, you had to figure out where you were going to record, which radio studio was going to allow you to record your lecture, and how were you going to get it out there, what time to pick for the program to be launched. Same with phonographic records. They had to think about the studio and how they recorded them, and then how to get them safely through the mail and not have them break on the way to the students. Even back in the day of that old penny postcard, if the postcard went awry, your student might end up in arrears in terms of getting their information to you as soon as you needed it. So you might have trouble with the Postal Service as well. And here there are all kinds of affordances that are specific either to the virtual world you're in or to the virtual environment you might be in, whether it's a video system or a webinar or whatever. You're always going to have to create course materials that are easy to follow, that make sense to the students, that don't have typos and problems. You may have to overcome resistance from students who are unfamiliar with the technology you're using. In many virtual world and online courses these days, the student is required to be in a half a dozen technologies in order to complete the course. And for people who are not technology savvy or are new to online or distance education of whatever kind, that can really be a turn-off. You have to provide that training in technology that you're using, even whether it's the main education delivery system or it's these ancillary things that you might want students to use. So for instance, we're in the SLMOOC course, we're on Facebook, we're in Second Life, we're in DigiWorlds, we're in Minecraft. We have people coming to the WizIQ webinars. We've got a Moodle installation. We've got a Twitter feed. So there's a whole variety of things that we're doing in an effort to customize the access to the content so that it's congenial to all of the students that are involved. But by doing that too, if you've got a newcomer, you might overwhelm them with this notion that, oh my God, I have to be in Second Life and I have to be able to get YouTube and I have to go talk to people in the Facebook group and I don't even know how to use my phone. So there's always that problem. And then you want to set the social tone for the course and reduce extracurricular social distractions as well. But the benefits, and this is the last content slide, the benefits should always be re-emphasized. That distance education of whatever type provides an availability of courses and experiences that can be asynchronous and involve the learner, the ability to connect with them, to contact with the instructor and so on in a time and in a way that's convenient for them. The social distance and the learning distance between the teacher and student and the students and other students can be breached, especially in co-immersive virtual worlds or with technologies that bring through that sense of co-presence. As education becomes more available to more people in more language, barriers are broken down and obstacles are broken down for individuals who need this kind of material. One of my favorite examples of how distance learning breaks down barriers was one of the early usage cases that was proffered by the Coursera folks who had that wonderful course, and I've forgotten his name now, Chuck Severn, maybe. He's a very famous computer sciences professor from University of Michigan, and he teaches a history of the internet course, or an introduction to the internet course on Coursera. That's one of the favorite courses that's out there. And he had a student who didn't actually finish the course, so he had a couple 100,000 students enrolled, and maybe 5,000-6,000 completed the course to get enough so they got the certificate. But one of the individuals who didn't complete the course did go through the course to such an extent that he was able to expand his computer services business in a small town in Mongolia. And he couldn't get in that town, he couldn't get in his country the kind of expertise he needed to expand his business. And because of the courses on computer science on Coursera, and especially this particular course, he was able to add skills to his toolbox of abilities that expanded his reach and made his business more stable. And that's really what this type of education and any type of distance education can accomplish in a way that's different from on-site education. And just to talk about the future slightly, up there in the top is somebody with Oculus Rift. Okay, so maybe that's not anybody's favorite virtual heads-up display these days, but you get the idea. And down at the bottom is somebody playing Pokemon Go who's found a dinosaur whose name I don't know. So the future is astonishing, and I would recommend you to watch the Virtual World Best Practices in Education 2017 videos on YouTube to see what's out there. There are a number of astonishing cases of usages of a variety of different augmented reality and other types of virtual and online education that show how the richness of an educational experience can be expanded and deepened, and the activeness of it, the way that it engages the learner and gives the learner more choice over how they learn and what they learn. That's also happening, and especially the beyond the book discussion between the CEO of Linden Labs and Kevin Feenan from Rockcliffe Consortium. That's an absolutely excellent video from the VWBPE conference this past spring. So I can't recommend that enough. So thank you very much for your attention. I just want to roll through the slides. I'll come back to this one. This is my contact information. I have a bibliography on here, which are the articles that I found the other day and have read through for this talk. There's 2 pages of them. And then I have the image retrieval information. Some of these go to blogs that are really quite interesting, and more image retrieval information. And then there's additional resources. This includes the old playlist from previous SLMOOCs and 2 journals, the Journal of Virtual World Research and the Virtual Education Journal. One is academic and one is a practice journal. And then other places that you can get more information. So all of this is downloadable when this will go up onto SlideShare right after I get done, and I will put the link into the appropriate into the appropriate note card. Both words started with N. Oh my God, aging brains. As soon as I get the slideshow up onto slideshare.com. And in the meantime, if you're looking for the other stuff and you don't want to pick up the note card, the account is Alvarado, that's my husband, Zingrone, that's me, and Associates, that's the name of the account on SlideShare, and we have a lot of stuff there. Listen to Flickr group. My goodness, what a good idea. We have been loading up all of our photos on Facebook. So you can see an enormous amount of stuff going back to 2014 on Facebook, and mainly Peonia has been doing this. And if you're a member of that Facebook group, it's just at the moment it's called Second Life. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Second Life MOOC. Next year we're going to rename it to Virtual World MOOC, so it'll be VWMOOC. Just get on there and you can upload anything that you would like to upload, the photos that you've taken and so on. Yeah, that's the right one, Sheila. That's where the pictures are. Are there any questions, guys? Oh yeah, and don't forget the Moodle. Nellie, do you have a link for that? Because if you haven't signed up for the Moodle portion of the course, that's where you can get the certificate for the SLMOOC, and you also have other opportunities for uploading vivid images and talking to other members of the course. And the PowerPoints will definitely be going up there. In fact, ultimately, all of the note cards that are in the wallboards, I will be uploading to the Moodle. I just haven't had a chance to do that yet. And the videos go up there as well. So the Moodle is a great place to get together, and there are some members of the course in the Moodle who cannot come into Second Life because of technological obstacles. So it's always great to meet them. You need to go to the Moodle. So yeah, Nellie has done a massively wonderful job on the Moodle installation. Any other questions, guys? I'm sorry I went over, but I was literally finishing the slides at 3:58, as usual. No, the Google Docs are, you can view them all, and every single one, not only can you click on, if you click on any of the wall boards, the descriptions of the events, there will be links to the Moodle installation and the Google Docs, so that you can also see the table. And as you see here next to the, thank you, Laura, for coming. As you can see here, the calendar that we have here, the interactive calendar, there are 3 boxes on the floor. One gives you the link to, let me see if I can get out a little bit and see what they are again. One gives you the link to the SLMOOC public calendar, so you can pop that onto your computer. One gives you the link to the Google Doc of the table of schedule, the table of the schedules for the course, and the third one gives you the link to the presenter's bio slideshow. So all of that is available. So everybody okay? I hope you will join us tomorrow for Edward Tarber's presentation. You have to, let me see if I can scroll this around so I can see the time on the board. It's at 1, I think it's at 1 p.m. Yep, making of a web-based virtual world will be 1 p.m. tomorrow here. And we will have Edward Tarber talking with us. So thank you again, all you guys, for coming. I'm so glad you could do this. It was great to see such a big group, and I'll be running out to pop this up on SlideShare as soon as we're finished. So, everybody good? Great! Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.